Okay, here we go. It's Wednesday, January 8th, 2025. We had some more firings in the NFL yesterday. We previewed the Chargers-Texans game and the Steelers-Ravens game. We have NBA games to recap. We have NHL games to recap. And Justin Verlander has a new home. This is the Early Game Podcast. Listen to the show in the mornings, on your commute, whenever and wherever, so you can be a part of today's sports conversations. Let's go. Just a reminder, follow us on the podcast X account at Early Game Pod. Make sure you're following us on Spotify so you get alerted when new episodes drop. And also, you can find us on YouTube, Early Game Pod YouTube account. Okay. So, it was reported yesterday morning that the Las Vegas Raiders were not going to continue with head coach Antonio Pierce. Along with that announcement was the fact that the Raiders would hold on to their general manager, Tom Telesco. That was according to Adam Schefter. And so here was the second head coach in the cycle to be fired in their first year. The first was the Gerard Mayo on Sunday, right after their game, the Patriots game. Gerard Mayo was fired. And now Antonio Pierce. Now, technically, he was head coach for longer than a season. He came in as interim head coach after Josh McDaniels was fired 2 seasons ago, so in the 2023 season. Then he was hired full-time in the last offseason. He went on to only win 4 games this season. Just kind of thinking about that for a second. Look at the pieces he had. You're going to tell me that with that roster, one that ended up starting Aiden O'Connell for a portion of the season, you're going to tell me that more should have been accomplished by Antonio Pierce than 4 wins? He doesn't even have a top 4 pick. Frankly, we had teams with, on paper, more talent do worse. So he initially gave a press conference on Monday as if he was staying. He said he had not heard anything out of the ordinary, but that he was going to be staying. And that's what he believed. He was going to be staying. But then it was announced on Tuesday afternoon that he was going to be fired, that the Raiders were going to move on. The interesting part of that was Diana Russini of The Athletic, she reported soon after the Antonio Pierce announcement that Tom Brady is going to have a say in who the next head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders will be. Remember, Tom Brady is currently a minority owner of the Raiders. He became one about midway through this past season. Here's my question. What does Tom Brady know? We assumed he'd be good at broadcasting. Look how that went. He wasn't that great. Just because he's a great quarterback doesn't mean he could do anything else in the world. Just because he can play well, extremely well, the greatest of all time, doesn't mean he knows how to hire the right head coach. I don't understand why teams can't let normal front office executives make front office executive decisions without unqualified people having their say. So, thinking about it for a second, what's the point of keeping Tom Telesco if his voice is going to be overshadowed by Tom Brady? Why not, while you're at it, fire Tom Telesco, have Brady be the GM. If he knows how to make so many smart decisions, make him the president of the Raiders. He can make all the football decisions, all the personnel decisions. Tell the head coach that Tom Brady is going to be the one deciding who his coordinators are, who his scouts are. He'll run the draft. He'll run free agency. Because clearly Tom Brady knows all. When we think about, take a step back for a second. I always like to take a step back. Throw any, if you are a casual fan, if you didn't follow the NFL to a T and you weren't always following every story and every statistic, and you just kind of followed it by story, take a step back for 1 second. A casual fan, if you told them that if a guy who was playing 2 seasons ago, yes, he's the greatest of all time at that position when he played, but a guy who was playing 2 seasons ago is now going to decide who the head coach is, they would tell you that that is a dumb decision and that will not work out. Take 1 step back and you'll realize that. Okay, let's move on. So the other firing yesterday was the Titans fired their GM, Rand Carthon. And going along with this theme of not firing both your GM and your head coach, the Titans will retain Brian Callahan as their head coach. Remember, he was the Bucs offensive coordinator last season. And this is just the thing that I always grapple with is, I think you should, if you're going to fire one, you should fire both. Because your GM should have chosen your head coach. That I firmly believe that. I think most situations work out for the best in the NFL when that happens. But when it doesn't happen, when teams decide not to, for whatever reason, the question to me is, which one's better? And we saw both situations yesterday. When the GM stays on and the head coach doesn't, or when the head coach stays on and the GM doesn't. And so here we have a situation where the Titans clearly need a quarterback. Will Levis is not the answer. And that is probably what's going to happen. The chances are they're going to take a quarterback with the first overall pick. And the chances are it will be Shedeur Sanders. He is the most highly regarded quarterback in the draft. And the question is, with what Shedeur Sanders brings, is it wise for Brian Callahan to even stick around on his own volition? I mean, he's under contract, so he has to. But this, again, seems like the kind of situation that will not work out well for Brian Callahan. It does not seem like the kind of thing that will end well for him. Remember, Shedeur Sanders famously played for his dad at Jackson State, most recently at Colorado. And the rumors were that Deion was going to follow Shedeur. This was before, I think this was not so recently, but about a year ago, the rumblings when people were talking about how Shedeur was going to be in the draft in 2025, I think that rumblings were, well, Deion will just follow him wherever he goes. Let's just think about this for a second. The Titans will have a new GM. Brian Callahan will be their coach. There's a good chance Shedeur is their quarterback. When inevitably this team does not play well next season, I'm just speaking to how trends work, how teams function, how these situations pan out. When that inevitably doesn't work, you're telling me that Deion Sanders won't be the head coach of the Tennessee Titans by 2026? I would put all my money on the head coach of the Titans being prime time Deion Sanders by 2026. Not only that, I wouldn't be shocked if he's the GM and the head coach by 2026. I want to say also, I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that it's such a bad thing for the Titans to bring on Deion as GM and head coach. Think about how much media attention that would bring them. Think about how much notoriety it would bring them. Look at how much attention Colorado gets. It's a subpar football team in college. And not a great conference. Think about if Deion and Shedeur are leading the helm of a football team in the NFL for a team like the Titans. That's not like it's rich in history. And so the other twist to this story was Deion himself yesterday. A twist to the Shedeur-Deion story is he, kind of going back to this Antonio Pierce situation, on an announcement, on a tweet, or on an Instagram post, where it was announced that Antonio Pierce would not be returning, that he'd be fired, Deion commented, "Whoa," with eyes. The eyes emoji. By the way, I love the eyes emoji. Anybody who knows me knows that I use that emoji probably most of all. Great emoji. This is an eyes emoji podcast. And so, even without the Raiders having a high pick, do you think Deion and Shedeur could find their way to Las Vegas and play for Mark Davis and Tom Brady? Okay, let's preview. What we'll do is, over the next 3 days, we will preview 2 of the wild card games leading up to wild card weekend, and then on Friday, I'll give my final picks for who will win each game over the weekend. We will start with Chargers at Texans. So this is going to be the 4 against the 5 in the AFC. Texans finished the season 10-7. Chargers were 11-6. Those records do not really reflect the talent level on this team and who will win this game. The Texans are very injured. Their top 2 receivers are out. They've been out all season for most. Tank Dell wasn't out all season. He was out for a majority of the season, or a big portion of the season, the last couple of weeks. Stephon Diggs, he's been out for most of the season. And so they are kind of described as, at the moment, as the quote-unquote team that had to come from the AFC South. On the other side, the Chargers have won 3 straight. They've got the top scoring defense, 17.6 points per game. Doesn't seem to bode well for a team that their top 2 receivers are out. The Texans, though, they can keep this game close with their defense themselves. Remember, the Chargers, the offense is pretty reliant on Lance McConkey. He's been great. The question is that enough? Can Justin Herbert and the Chargers offense produce enough against a solid Texans defense? Because all the Texans defense needs to do is lock down McConkey, and the Chargers are going to have issues after that. I'm thinking right now, though, I know we're focusing on this. I know we're just kind of discussing this playoff matchup. Boy, the Texans with another year under their belt and these pieces that are missing right now, they can be so dangerous. I'm excited about this Texans team for next year. Right now, though, I do think the Chargers will win the game. I'll give my final predictions on Friday's show. Okay, and now let's just take a quick look at the Steelers and Ravens game. The Ravens are the 3 seed. The Steelers are the 6 seed. And frankly, I have spoken several times about the fact that the Steelers are pretenders. This game is going to be a bloodbath. This is going to be the biggest blowout of the weekend. It's in Baltimore. Lamar is currently in the MVP conversation. I don't think he will win. The books are favoring Josh Allen heavy, but he has the second best odds to win the MVP. The Steelers just have not been able to find any sort of consistency offensively. They were unable to score more than 17 points in the last 4 games of the regular season. That being said, the Steelers did beat the Ravens in week 11. Very low scoring affair. 19-17 was the final. But we have to look right now at how these two teams are playing. Again, the Ravens are flying right now. They are scoring, and they are extremely tough for defenses to stop. And on the flip side, as I mentioned before, the Steelers just have not been able to find any sort of rhythm offensively. Now, I understand Mike Tomlin will have some sort of answer for Lamar. He showed it earlier in the season. The only way that the Steelers can win this game or even keep this game close is if Mike Tomlin can somehow replicate what he did week 11. But I just genuinely don't see that happening. Again, the Ravens are just playing too good of a brand of football right now. Lamar is playing too well. I don't think that Mike Tomlin can cook anything up to stop him. In that game, they held Lamar to 207 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. So clearly it's possible. But that means Lamar has seen the looks that Mike Tomlin has to stop him. So can Mike Tomlin either do that again without Lamar adjusting to it? Does Mike Tomlin have something else up his sleeve? Final prediction will come Friday, but it seems pretty clear that the Ravens are going to run away with this game. Okay, let's move on. Let's go to the NBA. Let's go through some recaps. Hornets beat the Suns 115-104. LaMelo Ball had 32 for the Hornets. Hornets snapped their 10-game losing streak. Then the Suns are in their own tailspin, which is kind of remarkable. They're 2-8 in their last 10, not even in a play-in spot at the moment. The Rockets, they continue the roll. They beat the Wizards 135-112. Jalen Green, he had another great performance with 29 points. They're half a game in front of Memphis for the 2 seed in the West. Mavs won 118-97. They beat the Lakers. They snapped their 5-game losing streak. Quentin Grimes led the team with 23 points. Remember, they're without Kyrie. They're without Luka Doncic. And so they've been able to do this with them. And funny enough, since we've started this podcast, that is not the first time Quentin Grimes, former Knick, led the Mavs in points. By the way, LeBron had an insane dunk in this game. He switched hands, windmill. If you go, I reposted it on the Early Game Pod X account. Go watch it. It was remarkable. Wolves at Pelicans. Zion Williamson returned for the Pelicans after sitting for 27 games. The Wolves win 104-97 and scored. Anthony Edwards scored 32 points, and Zion had an insane dunk in this one too. Another insane dunk last night. And again, I reposted that. You could see that at the Early Game Pod on X. Hawks at Jazz. This was a wild one. So the Jazz hit a 3 with a few seconds left to go ahead in the game, or to tie the game, excuse me. Then TRAE Young hit a half-court shot to win the game. It was a wild shot for the Hawks. And I reposted that. So I reposted 3 things for you on the X. That was also reposted. Hawks win 124-121. And that was part of a 24-point performance for TRAE Young. Celtics beat the Nuggets 118-106. Jason Tatum had 29 points. And the Celtics remain the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. Finally, the Heat beat the Warriors 114-98. Nikola Jovic had 20 points for the Heat, but Bam Adebayo had a phenomenal game, 19 points. 2 key dunks down the stretch. Miami won. All right. But the question is, where was Jimmy Butler last night? And so he was a DNP. He was a did not play because he was suspended by the team. And we all know this podcast is a Jimmy Butler podcast. We've been following the situation very closely. He was suspended 7 games. So the Heat announced, this was their announcement. We have on Friday, we have suspended Jimmy Butler for 7 games for multiple instances of conduct detrimental to the team over the course of the season, and particularly the last several weeks. Through his actions and statements, he has shown he no longer wants to be a part of this team. I mean, this situation is getting ugly. Really ugly. And yesterday we had an update to the situation. If you remember correctly, last week, Jimmy Butler in a press conference said, "I will play anywhere but Miami." Then yesterday, Chris Haynes reported that he's telling certain teams not to trade for him. What is going on here? What team in their right mind wants to put this player on their team? This stuff doesn't end well. These diva players, why do teams want them? The net result is never good. I promise you now, whatever team Jimmy Butler plays for, whatever team he is traded to, they will not win the NBA championship, and the Heat will be better off. This is just crazy. Good for Pat Riley. He said that Jimmy Butler is going to play after suspension's over. Good for holding your ground. Good for not letting the leverage get to you. That is a seasoned veteran, obviously, Pat Riley. Been around the block. He knows what he's doing. He probably learned his lesson. Make sure you're bringing in good personalities. Hasn't had to deal with that so often. He had LeBron and D. Wade and Chris Bosh. They balled out for him. Good for him. Good for Pat Riley. Stick your ground. I think if you're a Heat fan, you should be ecstatic. Get this guy off your team. Let them figure it out without him. You have a great head coach. You have a great president of the team. They will figure it out, those two. Without Jimmy Butler. They started that last night with the win. Okay, let's move on to the NHL. Stars beat the Rangers 5-4 in overtime. Jamie Benn scored the OT winner. Rangers blew a first period 3-0 lead. Woohoo, yes. Happy that happened. Right. The crazy thing about that is, and I talk about the Rangers on the show because I am a Rangers fan. Talk about them a little bit, with a little more knowledge and sensibility. They're only 4 points out of a playoff spot. So it's crazy to me that they can turn it around if they could just figure something out. And they've just had an awful stretch here. If they could just figure it out, they could make the playoffs. But that's besides the point. Let's move on. Lightning beat the Hurricanes 3-2. Braden Point scored with under a minute left to break a 2-2 tie. Carolina remains behind the Devils for third place in the Metropolitan Division. Oilers beat the Bruins 4-0. Stu Skinner posted the shutout. Adam Henrique had 2 goals for the Oilers. And the Bruins have just not been great, frankly. Lost to the Rangers and the Islanders in the past week. The Red Wings beat the Senators 3-2 in overtime. Patrick Kane scored the overtime winner. The Blue Jackets beat the Penguins 4-3 in a shootout. Adam Fantilli scored the shootout winner for the Jackets. They're currently in playoff spot. Let's go! Shout out to all the Blue Jackets fans, all the Blue Jackets listeners. Maple Leafs beat the Flyers 3-2. Matthew Nyes, he had the game-winning goal in the third period for the Leafs. Wild won 6-4. Ryan Hartman, he had 2 points for the Wild in that win. The Jets beat the Predators 5-2. Mark Scheifele had 2 points for the Jets. The Flames beat the Ducks 3-2 in overtime. Jonathan Huberdeau had the overtime winner for Calgary. And finally, the Vegas Golden Knights beat the Sharks 4-2. Shea Theodore had 2 points for Vegas. They continue the roll, and now they have the most points in the NHL. And I just want to give a quick update. So we spoke a little bit about Johnny Gudreau on the show. think that was actually in the debut episode we spoke about him. He was unfortunately killed in a bicycle car accident. He was on a bike. He got hit, and him and his brother, they were hit and unfortunately passed away. So yesterday, the guy who hit Johnny Gudreau, he pled not guilty. He was charged with first-degree aggravated manslaughter, and he pled not guilty. He was indicted last month on 2 counts of first-degree aggravated manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree reckless vehicular homicide. He was offered a 35-year sentence if he pleads guilty. If he pled guilty, he didn't. I just wanted to give an update on that. We will follow that story. It's obviously extremely unfortunate and extremely devastating for the world of hockey and for the Gudreaus. All right, let's finish off the show. We have some baseball stuff to talk about. Justin Verlander, he agreed to a 1-year deal with the Giants. It's a 1-year, $15 million deal. Last year, he threw just 90 innings for the Astros to the tune of a 5.48 ERA. Remember, he's 41 years old. He's definitely up there. But here's the thing. The Giants needed another starter. They have Logan Webb, Robbie Ray, Kyle Harrison, Jordan Hicks. So they need a 5th starter. He's old, but he didn't pitch a lot last year. And 2 seasons ago, he also didn't have a full season. So he still might have something left in the tank. And if you're bringing him on as a back end of the rotation guy, as we're seeing now, kind of, we saw Michael Lorenzen sign 2 days ago. We saw Justin Verlander yesterday. These back end rotation guys, they're getting these 1-year deals. That $15 million is a relatively high AAV. And he might have something, he might still have something left in the tank. We shall see. But if you're telling me that you want to take a gamble on Justin Verlander as for the back end of my rotation, sign me up. Why not? I don't see why not. 1 year, $15 million, low risk. Worst case, doesn't work out. You bring somebody up, trade for somebody. Now, the one key part that I don't really think people are talking about so much is that this might impact the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes. Why? Remember, Japanese pitchers pitch in 6-man rotations. The Dodgers right now have 7 starting pitchers. So part of the allure of going to the Dodgers is that they can boast a 6-man rotation for Roki Sasaki. Have him adjust a little bit better. I'm sure Ohtani and Yamamoto will benefit from that too. But now, what the Giants can offer Roki Sasaki is, hey, look, come here. We also have a 6-man rotation. Now, the Giants and the Dodgers are not the only teams with 6-man rotations they could offer. Remember, the Mets also, when Kodai Senga came, they pretty much always had a 6-man rotation. They built in off day, that was built in with off days and whatever it was, but they made sure that he was not going on 4 days rest. He was always going on 5 days rest. Great transition there, because speaking of Mets pitching, it was reported yesterday that they are in on left-handed reliever Tanner Scott. Scott was traded from the Marlins to the Padres at the trade deadline last year. He had a 1.18 ERA with the Marlins before he was traded. 2.73 ERA with the Padres, still great. But look, the Mets desperately need a left-handed pitcher, a left-handed reliever, excuse me. They face Bryce Harper. They face Matt Olson. They need a lefty guy, a lefty specialist, somebody who can come in against these great players that they face often in their division and get these guys out. And I think this would be a great move. Shorten games. We're seeing teams do that. The Yankees have now done that. Luke Weaver last season closed out was their closer by the end, and now they brought in Devin Williams, so they shortened games. And now the Mets might be looking to pair Tanner Scott with Edwin Diaz to lock down the end of games. And it will kind of work out great because you would, let's say against the Phillies, you would just pitch Tanner Scott whenever Harper's due up, whether it's the 8th or the 9th inning. Just want to also touch on, before we close this out, shout out David Wright, my childhood hero, getting his number retired for the Mets. That's number 5, will be retired in July, and he will be inducted into the New York Mets Hall of Fame. Okay, that's a show. Thanks for listening. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on X. Follow us on Spotify. This is the Early Game Podcast. We will see you tomorrow. More NFL recaps. We'll see you if anything else happens in the sports world. Have a fantastic day.